Hey Forrest, how is everything going?
It's good, man. I'm stoked to be here. Stoked to talk about Bitcoin, and yeah, let's run it.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining. I'm a huge fan of your work. I really like what you talk about on your YouTube. I like what you talk about on Twitter. You don't tweet too much, but I like what you talk about. And there was one video of yours that really got to me and it got me thinking. That video was called Bitcoin is Max Pain. Can you go through your thesis in that video, what you were talking about, what you were trying to get, what message you were trying to get across in that video?
Yeah, I mean, to simplify it, the message is to hold Bitcoin and not to look at the price in the short term because Bitcoin is extremely volatile, especially when you're coming from a TradFi space. You might not have experienced an asset like this, and if you did, it's something that is probably like going to go bankrupt soon, and that's why the volatility is there. Is it's a piece of crap, right? Bitcoin is volatile because of the adoption cycle that we're in, and people are still trying to figure out what it is worth. And to me, it's worth all the money in the world. It is the global base layer money, but it's max pain because of what's going on. Basically, part of it is there's a lot of leverage in the system. So there's a lot of people putting in these perp contracts on Binance or these other trading platforms, BitMEX, all these things, where they might be 100 times leveraged, 10 or 20 or 100, 200 times leveraged. And what that does is that's all visible information for people that have a lot of Bitcoin. We call them whales. And these whales will basically push the price up by buying more Bitcoin, and then they'll get to a point where somebody that's short, they have a liquidation price because of these perpetuals that they're the contract that they're in, and the whales will push the price up to there, and those perps will get liquidated. Those positions will get liquidated. The whales will scoop that up as spot Bitcoin because that's what they want, and they'll do the same thing to the downside. So Bitcoin trades in these channels of sideways and down for a long time, and this is something I just started to notice. And I was looking at price action because I still had some fiat on the side, and I was just looking for buying opportunities. So I don't want to buy at the top, and I can pretend that I can try to time the market in some ways. So I was just looking at the price, and I was just noticing, okay, Bitcoin is trading sideways and down until it doesn't. And when it doesn't, it trades up. Like it just it just bolts up from some kind of catalyst. And really, you want to be in the trade. You can't, it's so hard to time those specific moments where Bitcoin just rallies like crazy. So you need to already have a position before that. And you need to just weather this sideways and down action with incredible volatility. And that is just something that if you're paying too close attention to, you're going to be wondering, oh, is this the breakout? Is this the breakout? And then it doesn't hit all time highs again, or it starts to form these different patterns on the charts, and you're thinking, okay, well, maybe this isn't going to happen, and then you start to doubt yourself. And so it ends up being a place for a lot of right. I called the video Max Pain. It ends up just being a place where if you're in this position and you care too much about the fiat denominated price of Bitcoin, that you're going to be possibly shaken out. And that's what these whales are wanting to do. They're shaking out players that are in leverage, but if they shake out a spot holder, that just helps them along their journey to hit their goals as well. So to me, it's just a reminder, and this was the intent of the video, was just to say the best position to be in is holding Bitcoin. That's it. That's it. You weather through all of the pain and you see the upside because you're in a position.
That's it. That's the easiest way to do it. I feel like if you just hold on, you're not dealing with all of the people who have these Bloomberg terminals, these algorithms, these bots trading for them. You're not faster than a machine.
Yeah.
Regardless of what you do, if you try to time the market, you're going to lose money because the market is designed to be that way. You're not supposed to be able to make easy money because your opponent is other people in the market. So if you're trying to trade in and out, what you're doing is you're trying to compete with other people
Mhm.
who maybe they're not smarter than you, but it's very it's a very high likelihood that they are much smarter than you, and they're going to take everything that you have. They don't care about you. Couldn't It doesn't matter if it's your retirement fund, doesn't matter if it's your children's education, doesn't matter. You're going to lose everything because that's how Bitcoin works. That's just the way that it is. Bitcoin is true capitalism, at least in my opinion. And I think your Max Payne theory really, really made that make sense. So, what do you think about people who are, I mean, in general, buying altcoins, trying to outperform Bitcoin? What do you say to that?
Oh man. um, Bitcoin is the true innovation in this space. When you start to look at other altcoins, they're trying to ride the coattails of Bitcoin. What they do is they try to compete on metrics that they can compete on. They say, "Oh, we have faster transactions per second," and then if you don't know
Mhm.
about this space, you think, "Oh, okay, well that's valuable, that's good, so I'm gonna buy this altcoin because they say they're faster than Bitcoin." Isn't that what's important? But it's actually not what's important, because when you're trying to be money, you need to be the most secure money. And security happens with hash rate. It happens with the inability to double spend, the immutability of the ledger. And we have Bitcoin, which is the longest history, right? It has the longest ledger that is immutable, it cannot be changed. And it is also the most decentralized. And decentralization is another type of security, because the ledger is replicated and held by all of these nodes around the world, 20,000 reachable nodes, 200,000 unreachable nodes. And you would have to go to each one of those people and convince them to change their ledger if you wanted to do something fraudulent on Bitcoin. Whereas if you buy these altcoins, XRP is one that I always rant on, because it is just the most transparent, clear scam, but it's pretending it's not, which is much more devious than other altcoins like meme coins. Meme coins are not pretending to be anything. There's no utility in meme coins. They're just like, literally, you're buying a circular little image on a screen. You're not even, you don't get anything from it. But at least in that, it's like you're not pretending you're getting anything either. So with something like XRP, they're saying we're going to be cross-border platform money, cross-border payment system and all this. And really, it's just a startup fund. It's a startup fund for Ripple Labs. They constantly dump on the holders of XRP. They use that money to fund whatever technology they want to build. They're consultants for basically central banks to create CBDCs, because they've created a CBDC in the form of XRP. And they do all this, but they say like, "Oh, we're going to be used by banks around the world," and they just lie to all of their holders. Bitcoin has no, and so with that, there's centralization, right? Um,
Oh, I actually want to say something.
sure,
You can send meme coins across borders too, so that's the funniest part. You
right?
can you can just pretty much do everything that XRP does with a meme coin,
Yes,
and that just defeats the purpose of XRP.
100%. You can do it with literally every cryptocurrency.
Yeah,
Every cryptocurrency is borderless because it's digital.
yeah.
It doesn't. Yeah, XRP is not unique in that way. Um, Yeah, so centralization is the problem with the majority of altcoins. Some of them are there's even more problems, right? Pre-mines and um, vaporware and all these kind of things. But centralization is a big problem, because if something can be shut down, and if something is like Bitcoin is incredibly useful because it's permissionless, because it's censorship resistant. And that censorship resistant part is because it cannot be shut down. If XRP ended up being super useful and governments couldn't control it, then but that's what Bitcoin is, right? But XRP can be shut down, it can be controlled, it can, because there's these central points of failure. There's founders, there's it's the same with Ethereum, right? It's the same thing with all altcoins. I don't mean to just pick on XRP, although it's one of the nails in the bunch that you can hammer down. um but yeah, centralization is a problem with all of these other altcoins, and Bitcoin is the true innovation. People say it's too slow. Well, have you tried Lightning Network? Because it's incredibly fast. I've used it lots. It works great. I have no problem with the Lightning Network, and it is secured. It's settled on the base layer of Bitcoin. So to me, Bitcoin is definitely the true innovation in this space. And people will use altcoins and say, oh, I can trade them to try to acquire more Bitcoin. And I just, again, it comes back to that thing. Are you like, and you mentioned, people with Bloomberg terminals and different insights and stuff. These people are doing that for their entire profession, a lot of them, or they've spent years learning these kind of things. And to me, it's just like, you're competing, you might be, if you're getting into this space, you're competing against people with so much more information, so much more skills, and so much more knowledge. And are you really willing to spend years learning how to do this? Or maybe your time is better spent honing the skills that will help your career or help your business or whatever you do to earn fiat right now, and then just porting that into something like Bitcoin. Like, that's how I view Bitcoin. I view it as my savings account, and I don't earn in Bitcoin, although I earn a little bit in Bitcoin now in different ways, but I earn a lot more in fiat. And then that fiat just immediately goes into Bitcoin. I treat it as a savings account. That's how I view Bitcoin for my personal finances.
I think at best, all of these other cryptocurrencies could be, I don't know, maybe some kind of business
Yeah.
at best. I mean, you're adding a lot of risk though if you buy, let's say you buy Ethereum.
Hmm.
There was a tweet that I saw from Vitalik, the creator. He was saying how I'm the one who controls everything.
Yeah.
He's basically telling people like you don't have any say in this. I'm the one who holds all the keys. I'm the one who changes things. I'm the one who suggests things. You get your thoughts out of this. You have no control over this. You don't even think that you can control it. And to me, I mean that's scary, right? Because what if let's say I think he's in the US right now. Let's say the US, let's say he creates a CBDC
Hmm.
and the US government says, "Okay, you need to sanction these countries. You need to sanction this country. You need to sanction this country." I think what that does is it just decreases the number of people who can use that cryptocurrency because it's not neutral.
Yeah.
Why would they want, let's say, why would they want XRP? Why would they want Ethereum when, okay, so XRP, for example, Ripple owns what, like 80% of the supply or something like that, something crazy. Their executives got 20% of the supply. So the entire supply went to those people. With
Hmm.
Ethereum, you know for a fact that this guy pre mined 70% of the coins and now he has control over the entire network.
Yeah.
So, what will he do to make sure that the value of his coins keeps going up? Or not even the
Mm.
value of his coins keep going up. What will he do to make other people believe that this token is valuable? So
Yeah.
it could go so many different ways. I feel like there's so much corruption in this. Have you noticed that there's a wave of people in crypto? Like for example, there was Lady of Crypto, there was Benjamin Cowan. They're actually saying that they're going to become Bitcoin maxis.
Oh yeah. Yeah,
Have you seen that?
I have seen that. Yeah, that tweet by Vitalik, the founder of Ethereum, was, I think, a big wake up call for a lot of people in ETH
Yeah.
space. ETH has been one of
Can you
those.
share it on your end if you can? I'm not sure
Uh,
if you can share. I can't share on my end.
I don't know how to do that. I'm sorry.
Oh,
No,
that's okay then. Maybe I'll I'll paste it
sure.
on top or something. Go ahead.
Yeah. It was a big wake up call for a lot of people in the ETH space because it was a clear indication that there's a founder and they have to agree 100% with the direction that that founder wants to take it. And if they don't, then they're out of luck, right? Like, it's something completely out of their control. So yeah, I have noticed people switching to Bitcoin. I think it's good. To contradict that though, the US has also got this pro crypto kind of vibe going for it, right? David
Yeah,
Sachs,
that's true.
crypto czar, Trump launching his own meme coin. I think, unfortunately, but it's just part of the cycle. But I think there will be an alt season, which will reinvigorate a lot of people jumping into all these altcoins. Um, but I think that they probably are going to lose their shirt in the long run, and I think would just be a lot of people that are into crypto, they think, oh well, Bitcoin is safe, Bitcoin is safe, like that's, I want to make outsized gains. And it's like, you're not happy with, like, last year it did like 140%. You're not happy with 140% up. Like, you guys are totally like not connected at all to the reality of financial markets, because people are trying to beat the S&P, which is on average going up 12% a year. Like that's like the reality. And then so a lot of people in this space are really just undereducated about financial markets. They think it's totally normal to get 20% for lending out your stable coins, or and then BlockFi happens. It's just there's just a total undereducated demographic of people that are into altcoins. And you know that's that's part of what I think both of us are probably trying to do, is just bring a little bit education here and say, okay, Bitcoin's the innovation, look into Bitcoin, and connecting it back to other things. Like you've done some great connections back to real estate, and just realizing like how this is different, but how we should think about all of these things connecting.
Yeah, that actually gives me a perfect opportunity to pivot. You mentioned something about real estate in the beginning, where either you sold your house or you plan to sell your house. Can you talk more about that?
Yeah, in 2023, I sold my house. It was an old farmhouse in rural Ontario. I was trying to do some homesteading stuff. It was like the only thing I could afford at the time. It was $128,000. I bought it in 2020. Lived in it for 3 years. Sold it for 250,000. So I was like, "Oh wow, this is great." If I had bought Bitcoin instead of the house, I would have been doing even better. But um, yeah, so anyway, I was like, wow, I've like doubled my money essentially. Which is great. And then I started looking into, that was like when I started thinking, okay, now I have money. Because you get that payment when you sell your house, and I'm just thinking, what should I do with this? I was thinking about renting this house out instead of selling it, so maybe I'll look into REITs, which are real estate investment trusts, or S&P, and maybe throw a little bit into Bitcoin. I had Bitcoin in the past, but never had any money, right? And Saylor famously has said, like, you have to have a need to know. And for me, it's like, my need to know was because I'd finally gotten some money in my life. So I took this money, and over time, I bought a bunch of different things. A diversified basket of equities and ETFs and all this stuff. And over time of research, I started looking into inflation. Inflation was so obvious here in Canada because you look at prices of food. I go to the grocery store and things are going up like every month. And then I think, okay, well, what causes inflation? And then you're just doing Chat GPT searches, Google searches, watching videos, and thinking, okay, what are good hedges to inflation? That brings you to gold. Bitcoin gets mentioned every once in a while. I look into Bitcoin. And then I see the historic returns and the future potential for Bitcoin and the catalysts on the horizon, and everything just started. I just started selling everything that I had bought, and just putting it into Bitcoin, because it's just so clear to me the asymmetrical bet of the upside of Bitcoin over a long period of time. This is money that I don't need to use every single day. And again, this comes back to me using it as a savings account. This isn't money that I need to dip into. This isn't money that I need to use for my rent. This is long term thinking. It gave me a horizon of, okay, if I'm going to buy Bitcoin, I'm going to hold it for 4 years minimum. And now it's like, I plan to actually never sell my Bitcoin. That's my new plan. Is I plan to never ever sell my actual cold storage Bitcoin ever. And I've done a little bit of like Microstrategy stuff, and some ETFs and whatnot. And because of being in registered accounts, and it's hard, you can't actually get Bitcoin here in Canada in your registered account. So I've had to do some derivatives and things of Bitcoin. But even those, like, yeah, I don't know. I just don't plan to ever like sell Bitcoin. Like, it just doesn't make sense to me to ever sell it at this point.
Yeah. Yeah, I think at some point it doesn't even make any sense to. I mean, if you want to buy a house for maybe the stability, that's perfectly
Sure.
fine. But I would think that housing is so. Right now, a lot of people think of housing as just a savings account.
Yeah.
I think that thinking of housing as a lifestyle choice is a much better way to go,
Hmm.
right? Because what you're doing is you're changing your lifestyle.
Sure.
You're making your lifestyle in a way. You're setting your lifestyle up in a way that like if you buy a house, I mean, you're
Hmm.
setting your lifestyle up in a way that you have to make sure you maintain this house. You have to keep paying for maintenance. You have to keep paying for repairs. That's a lifestyle change. And a lot of the
Right.
people who are doing that can't afford it because they just think that, oh, a house is a great savings account. So what they do is they just buy a house, and then they basically, I've noticed more and more people are house poor because they can't afford to live their life, right? And all they're doing is they're spending all of their money on this house. They're putting all of this money towards the house. But then the sad thing is that the majority of it is going to the bank
Hmm.
that is lending you the money to buy the house. So let's say, for example, in my area, uh, I'm in Ontario, so the houses are
Hmm.
like $500,000 minimum,
Yeah.
right? So if you buy a $500,000 house, you have a 6% interest rate. You put down 20%. Let's say you buy a $625,000 house, you put down 20%, you borrow 500,000. In 30 years, you're paying $500,000 in interest alone,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And that's crazy. That's just insane. People think that renting is a waste of money, but they don't see that side of real estate. They think, oh, you're getting a tangible product at the end of it. I mean, it almost feels like that's marketing from the bank. So the way that I see it, my paradigm has been completely shifted, right? I don't see real estate as a savings account anymore. I see real estate as a melting ice cube. Would you agree?
I totally agree. Uh, you know, I I mentioned that my house was an old farmhouse. It was built in 1929. I spent probably 30, 40 grand fixing this home up. The maintenance was unbelievable. Um,
Mm.
the property taxes, there's so many things that are out of your control. Like maintenance can be slightly within your control because you can evaluate what is going to need maintained over a certain amount of time unless something unexpected happens, which unexpected things do happen. But property taxes, largely out of your control. Insurance costs, out of your control. There's all these costs associated with holding real estate that you don't control and that could go up and it makes it unaffordable. The interest rate, too, right? Like here in Canada, we have basically variable rates. Like you can get a fixed term for 5 years max, but then, after that 5 year term, interest rates could go way up. Like my interest rate for my house was 1.89%, like insanely low.
Wow.
And, I held the house for 3 years, but at 5 years, I was estimating, well, my mortgage rate or my mortgage cost is probably going to be exactly the same or very close to the same because the interest rate will have gone up. And so there's a position that you could be in where you're barely able to qualify for a house. Owning a house, you've been told your whole life this is a great investment, this is how people grow their value, it's better than renting where you're throwing money away, at least you're paying down this mortgage, and you could just barely qualify for a house. You could maybe keep the same amount of income, or maybe your income would even go down. Like unexpected things can happen in life. And then the interest rate changes and your term comes up and you're screwed and you lose that house. Like it's totally possible. It happens. It does happen to people. And I think real estate is a lot more risky than people think. Plus, these loans people are getting, they're getting leveraged, 5x of what their initial investment is if they put 20% down, 10x if they put 10% down. Like people, that leverage is crazy. Like that's insane.
Yeah.
Like people don't think about how insane that is. And I also think that, you talked about how people treat real estate as savings vehicle, and they do. And so there's a monetary premium to houses because people think it's an investment, a savings investment. And what happens if that monetary premium starts leaking out of the housing market, which I think it will, because there's a much better investment out there that doesn't have maintenance costs. You send it over the on chain. You pay a one-time fee for the miner fee. You put it in a hardware wallet that costs you $150, and then there's no maintenance cost, and that asset is called Bitcoin, and it has a CAGR of what, like 66% per year, something like that, like something insane. And yeah, sure, that'll fluctuate and go down or whatever over a long time, but insane rate of return. No maintenance cost, no headache, no having to treat it as a business when you put renters in there, and no having to hire property managers, no unexpected property tax hike or insurance cost up or whatever. And it's a better way to save. And I think that's going to start decreasing the value in nominal terms of these houses, which I think is a great knock-on effect. In Canada here, housing is too expensive. It's totally prohibitive for a lot of people to get housing. A lot of my friends were, just like, I have a friend who's an electrician. I have a friend that works in the oil field, another one that paints houses, and they don't even think that they can buy a house here in BC. Like, they don't even question it. They just say, "Oh, well, I'm going to just be living at my parents, living at my girlfriend, or like living with my girlfriend, renting a small place, whatever." Like, they never think about buying a house because it's not even possible for them. And that's crazy to me. So I think a great knock-on effect of adopting Bitcoin will be the demonetization of real estate as an investment, and then houses can go closer to their utility value, and we can all own houses if we want. Like, if that's what we want to do, we can own a house.
Yeah, I think another so everything you're saying makes complete sense. I feel like right now, because of how housing works, people can't afford houses. I think one of the main issues here is that people don't even care about the house. They just care about the loan, right? Because
Yeah.
the loan is just their ability to print money.
Yeah.
And they can print as much as they want to. They can buy a house. And then what they can do is, after they have that house, after they've borrowed money to buy the house, after a little while, oh, they're guaranteed to make some money. And now they can borrow even more money.
Hmm.
And they're guaranteed to make even more money on that. And they can borrow even more money. And they can basically just keep accumulating more and more real assets because the money that we use is completely fake. I also think that, I don't know, this is just something that I thought of now. I also think that it makes it harder to own and or to start and own just a mom and pop business, right? A small
Hmm.
business. Because let's say, for example, you have a storefront, you're paying rent. Your rent just keeps going up and up and up. And what you have to do is you have to keep increasing your prices in order to maintain that payment that you make for your rent. People can't even buy their own business anymore. They can't buy the land because it's so expensive. Everybody just sees it as a savings account and they lend it out to other people to make more cash flows. It just completely breaks the entire system. And I feel like what another just complete sidetrack, it pushes more people to do minimum wage jobs. Cuz what they
Mm.
have to do is they can't start their own business. So they can't start their own business because the barrier to entry is so high. So they just do this minimum wage job, and the opportunity cost, if you look at the opportunity cost for starting a business versus doing a minimum wage job, it doesn't even make any sense anymore. Like for me, for example, I was so lucky that my wife is a nurse. She earns great money.
Hmm.
If she didn't earn great money, I wouldn't be able to start this business. I wouldn't be able to start posting videos on YouTube. I would have had to look at the opportunity cost. Okay, so if I continue to work at my job, um, I can pay this much. But if I take a part time job and I do YouTube on the side, I'll lose
Hmm.
this much money. And in the first 3 years, I would have lost money, right? And
Hmm.
and most people can't go that far without losing, without making money, right? Because they have their day to day expenses, their costs are going up. So I don't know. The fact that real estate is being used as a savings account, it just breaks the entire market. And I feel like that's one of the reasons why I think that breaking the real estate market is going to be a huge benefit of owning Bitcoin,
Yeah.
of turning Bitcoin into that store of value that everyone uses on a day-to-day basis. And now nobody uses real estate anymore as a store of value. What else can we do? Like there are so many things, so many downstream effects of real estate not being a store of value.
Hmm.
And I feel like it's just it's so abstract to people. Like we see it, even
Hmm.
us, we probably can't even imagine the real benefits of it. But most people are so far behind, they still think real estate is a savings account. Uh,
Yeah.
Would you what would be your way to explain to someone just very simply, get out of real estate, buy Bitcoin, like get rid of your rental properties?
What would be my way? Yeah. Well, I think there's one thing I want to touch on there, and then I can answer that question. But this all
Yeah.
comes back to the fact that money is broken. Like,
Yes.
people wouldn't be trying to escape. The people are buying housing as a savings vehicle because of inflation, because of monetary debasement. If that wasn't happening, they wouldn't be seeking that type of thing because they could just hold money
Yeah.
instead. And that's what Bitcoin is, right? So to explain why you shouldn't buy real estate, you should buy Bitcoin. You have to somebody has to understand what money is and why the money is broken. Um, Another thing I wanted to touch on there was that because of inflation, it creates all of these other incentives that people don't realize, right? Like again, my friends, instead of buying a house, they'll buy a big truck because they can afford that, right? And it's like it shortens your time horizon and makes you seek shorter term things because you cannot think long term, because you might as well spend the money. And some of this is subconscious; they're not consciously like, oh, my money's becoming worthless, but they're like, I might as well spend it now because I know that it's going to be worth less in the future anyway. So it creates a lot of consumerism and short-term thinking and all these kind of things. And it also creates an incentive to get into debt because the the money inflation that happens to your savings, it has that same effect on a loan, on the same effect on debt, but it's kind of for your benefit as opposed to as when it happens on your savings. So the debt, you get that money today, but you pay that debt off over time, but the debasement of that currency actually makes the purchasing power of those numbers of the debt worth less every single day. So it creates incentive to get into debt, and it creates incentive to find, like, to just store your money in these things that you think will be hedging inflation, instead of putting it into creating something like, um when I talk about like, oh, don't buy real estate and get Bitcoin instead, well, you could also not have real estate and you could invest in a business, a startup, an idea, that you think it might not even outperform Bitcoin. Like, I don't think my business has outperformed Bitcoin since I started in 2016, but I've still created a lot of things. I've helped a lot of people. I've created entertainment and education with my documentaries, and there's a value to that as well. So I think instead of just storing money somewhere, we can implement it back into the world. So there's sort of a, I don't know, just like an incentive in that way that is like unseen by most people. But to kind of come back to your question there, I would just have to start explaining what money is, which is a very complex topic. I would talk about how Bitcoin, I mean, a lot of times people get into Bitcoin because of the number go up. So you have to, like, a lot of times it's the appeal of the greed, right? It's talking about how historically Bitcoin has done so well, and how if you actually factor in, like, I showed a chart on one of my latest videos where I talked about real estate actually, and it showed real estate gains adjusted for inflation, and it was pretty stagnant. Like, it wasn't really that much because it tracks a lot of M2 money supply growth, and that M2 just goes into people being able to purchase real estate for a higher price, which drives the price up. So that's just a factor of monetary debasement, the increase of real estate price. And then if you were to factor in again all those costs that we've talked about, insurance, maintenance, property tax, you're probably not coming out with more purchasing power by investing in real estate, even though people think they are. It's just
Yeah.
the asset really is that loan, because the monetary debasement is probably around the same rate that you're getting at the interest rate. And so that loan ends up being almost free in purchasing power, which is kind of a weird concept to wrap your head around, too. So for me, it's like, it's very difficult to convince somebody not to invest in real estate and invest in Bitcoin, because the entire subject is totally complex and multifaceted and fascinating, and that person has to be interested in learning those things. But
Yeah.
yeah, those would be the starting points, right? Talking about these kind of different aspects that you got to deep dive into each one of these, and it's going to take weeks to fully understand and grasp, in my opinion.
Yeah, it is really difficult for most people to wrap their heads around. Like for me, it took me almost 3 years to really figure out Bitcoin and to try to go all in.
Yeah.
And I mean, before that, it was crazy. It was just like, like, what are you buying? You're buying nothing, right?
Yeah.
At a point, I was just thinking, oh, it's just another asset. But when you keep learning, when you keep trying to focus on what this thing is over the long term, I think I think it becomes very difficult not to see where it's going. I want to ask you, I want to do another pivot here. I want to ask
Sure.
you about MicroStrategy. So you do a lot of great videos on MicroStrategy. Can you just explain your thesis on MicroStrategy to my audience here?
Sure. Yeah, MicroStrategy is another complex topic because, again, you have to understand Bitcoin and then you have to start beginning to understand financial markets, financial instruments, the capital markets, basically, and MicroStrategy's strategy um, to wrap Bitcoin in different financial products. So MicroStrategy has a business intelligence software company, 2,000 employees or so, and it's profitable sometimes and unprofitable other times, but they're a corporate entity that's publicly listed. And what that grants them is the ability to tap into financial markets, unlike you and I that are just individuals or private businesses. So they can issue, and what they've done in the past is they can issue corporate bonds. So this is just a bond with an interest rate. This is like you and I taking out a loan, but it might have more favorable conditions. And what they did was they bought Bitcoin. So, sorry, to go even further back, they initially bought Bitcoin and bought back shares from people that didn't want to participate in the Bitcoin buying. This was their first announcement of Bitcoin. I think it was maybe, what was it, $500 million of Bitcoin they bought, and $500 million of like shares from people that wanted out of the company because they were adopting the strategy. And then they issued corporate bonds. Since then, they've issued convertible bonds. So this is another captive market that they've been able to tap into. There are institutions out there that are mandated. So it's forced upon them to participate in certain types of markets. And one of those is convertible bond market. So a convertible bond is a bond, which is a debt instrument, but it has some sort of conversion price baked into it, which can be seen as almost like a call option. So MicroStrategy might issue a convertible bond that is, dated for 3 years. So at the 3 year mark, it either needs to convert or the initial payment of the bond needs to be repaid. And then along that way, there might also be an interest rate. So what's interesting about MicroStrategy is because of their incredible volatility, these convertible bonds become worth a lot based on their conversion ability, not based on the interest rate that they pay. So the interest rate that they've been able to pay averages out to something like 0.47%. So incredibly cheap debt is what they're getting by issuing these convertible bonds. And as soon as they get that initial payment from somebody that's buying these convertible bonds, they buy Bitcoin and they put that on their balance sheet. And that actually delevers them to some degree because it's increasing the net asset value of their company. They're also able to issue equity. So they're just tapping into all of these different markets. And equity is just stocks. So they're able to sell stocks into the market and buy Bitcoin with the proceeds of that. And again, that's raising their capital, their Bitcoin holdings, which will allow them to issue more debt into the future. Um, the stock has performed like absolute crazy. It's like it's just insane. Like last year, I think it was 400 and something percent in 1 year. Best performing stock on the Nasdaq listed company, I believe. They just got included in the QQQ. I've made so many videos about them because they're incredibly fascinating, and there's so many things that are happening with them. The chairman is Michael Saylor, who's a Bitcoiner. He's a strong advocate, talked on many podcasts. I'm sure people listening to your show actually know all of these basic things, but um, to me, MicroStrategy is a good way to invest in a Bitcoin derivative. Like you're never allotted the Bitcoin that they hold underneath, but that's one of their key performance in indexes, yeah,
Metrics?
KPIs, metrics, yeah. Anyway, is that they're acquiring more Bitcoin per share. So they call it Bitcoin yield. And this is kind of one of the things that I find attractive about MicroStrategy is you could buy more Bitcoin than your Bitcoin allotment if you bought MicroStrategy as opposed to buying Bitcoin. But over time, the idea is that they're able to increase the Bitcoin per share, and you could map that out into the future, and at a certain point you'd actually have more Bitcoin underlying your shares than if you had bought in Bitcoin originally. So that's kind of the idea of Bitcoin yield. That's why they track it. And that's part of the appeal to me. And then, of course, I have money in registered accounts, which has led me to look for Bitcoin like instruments and led me to MicroStrategy, where I could not buy Bitcoin directly. I think Bitcoin directly is still my number one biggest position. It's still the thing that I advocate for the most because of its usefulness as permissionless, censorship resistant money and as a bearer instrument. I find those things to be incredibly valuable. But I think MicroStrategy is probably going to outperform Bitcoin as it has in the past. I think it probably will in the future, and it's something that I follow quite a lot. And it's a great like intellectual um, uh, thing for me to dive deeper into and continue to learn because there's a lot to learn about these things.
Yeah, a lot of people still think that MicroStrategy's value comes from just the Bitcoin holdings, but I think that because of how equity markets work, the value is coming from the potential. Because it's like if you think about it, this is something that confuses a lot of people. They see a net asset value premium and they think, oh, why would I pay more if I could just buy the Bitcoin?
Yeah.
But what you're doing is you're paying for the future potential. So let's say in 20 years, MicroStrategy is the biggest Bitcoin bank in the world because they have all this Bitcoin. They can start lending it out, or they can
Hmm.
use it as collateral. They can use it to create dollars, and they can lend those dollars out to somebody else.
Hmm.
It gives them so many different avenue streams, or sorry, revenue streams. And if they capitalize, if they actually use this money that they're holding right now, if they use it to create something, I think it could be the biggest business in the world. It's the way that I see it, it's almost like investing in like JP Morgan back
Interesting.
before they even became public, right? Because
Yeah.
the public business was just them, I mean, lending money more easily, whatever it was, however they started. But it's like if they were just trying to accumulate capital and they're just raising capital from markets, they're trying to find entrepreneurs, venture capitalists who are willing to give
Mhm.
them money so they can build. Or even before that, whatever the history of JP Morgan was, whatever their capital accumulation strategy was, I think that's where we're I think that's where we're getting in. So that's
Totally.
where MicroStrategy is, because MicroStrategy is accumulating digital capital. It's like a real estate. It's like a REIT
Yeah,
accumulating real estate and then using it as cash flow later on, right?
definitely.
So that's the way that I see it. I don't know. Maybe that's the wrong way to look at it. Would you? What would be your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. And you said they're accumulating digital assets right now, and that's where I view them right now, and that's why it's so interesting as well to look into the future of potential. Is right now they are in an accumulation phase. They don't care about using their Bitcoin. Like they could lend it out. Mara, Marathon Digital Holdings, is lending out I think 16 or 17% of their Bitcoin holdings and earning some sort of interest on that. MicroStrategy is not doing that. And I think the reason they're not doing that is because it's really early to be lending it out. Like we've seen a lot of failures of lending Bitcoin out in recent history. So, and I think MicroStrategy is not getting, they're not trying to pick up pennies in front of the steamroller. They're saying, we are in a growth phase. We are a growth company. We're basically like a startup right now that's acquiring seed capital. And we're doing that by issuing converts, issuing equity, issuing for preferred stocks, whatever else we might do to just raise as much fiat money as possible right now, swapping that into this digital capital that we believe and our shareholders believe. I know I believe that the future of capital is Bitcoin and that MicroStrategy is going to have the most Bitcoin. No one's going to be able to catch them. And what will that mean in the future? I think it's going to be amazing. I think it's going to be, like you said, maybe they'll be lending it out. And I think right now, like, I don't have the creativity in this space to even think about the possibilities. Like we can think about simple ones, like they'll be lending the Bitcoin out, but I think it's it's fairly difficult to map out all of the possibilities of what they could do with this Bitcoin. It could be incredibly valuable that they hold this much of a stack and that they're this dominant in this space, because it will require other businesses to work with MicroStrategy to access that capital in some way if they need exposure to it. And that will form relationships, and basically, um, the future is bright, basically is what I'm saying for MicroStrategy. And right now they're just in an accumulation stage of acquiring as much Bitcoin as possible. That's how I see it.
I think the marathon strategy that you outlined there, I feel like it adds more risk to the shareholders because
Yeah.
right now, like you mentioned, we're still so early. The I think the biggest problem is that, let's say you lend your let's say Marathon lends their Bitcoin to someone, and then whoever that borrower is, they're probably either going to sell it or they're going to do something with it. Maybe they're going to start a business with it. But over time, let's say for example, they lend it at 100K and Bitcoin goes to $1 million. And whoever they lent it to, what if they can't pay them back? What if their business underperforms? What if they shorted it and they go
Yeah.
bankrupt? All that risk. I don't know if a lot of the maybe investors into Marathon are thinking about that. I don't know, because that could
It was a
actually 16% is a lot.
Yeah, it was a pretty small news story. Marathon doesn't drive a lot of the news cycle. I think people miss a lot of stuff they're doing. They're mining Caspa, which is an altcoin. They're
Yeah,
lending out their capital. I think they're taking on way more risk than they need to. Like, they're the second biggest holder
yeah.
of Bitcoin right now. I think they just need to double down. They can mine Bitcoin for a very good price. They can issue converts to buy more Bitcoin. I think they're taking on more risk than they need to by lending their Bitcoin out. Definitely.
Yeah, I don't even think that's necessary at this point. Like you can
No.
there's such a massive market of people who are willing to lend money because they have just free cash sitting there. Like MicroStrategy is taking advantage of it. Even with
Yeah,
Marathon's converts that they issued, that was a great way for them to generate cash flow. Why not do that?
totally.
Why take the risk of losing your Bitcoin at some point? And I think that's partly why I like MicroStrategy so much. Even though MicroStrategy could fail, I mean, it's an investment. It could fail. Nobody can tell you, oh, it's not going to fail. If somebody's telling you no, MicroStrategy is the future, it's guaranteed, they're lying to you. They have
Yeah,
no idea. So what I would say is MicroStrategy can still fail, but it's about the level of risk that you're taking. So if MicroStrategy were to go ahead and lend all their 450,000 Bitcoin, and whoever they lend it to can't pay them back. I mean, if 450,000 Bitcoin, who's going to be able to buy that level of Bitcoin? I think if a massive buyer goes into the market today to
yeah,
buy 450,000 Bitcoin, it'll probably bump the price up to like 3, 4, 500K minimum. And I mean,
yeah.
that's insane. So how is anybody going to pay them back unless it's like the U.S. government or something? I mean,
Mhm.
even in that case, that's pretty crazy. But to me, MicroStrategy is a better bet. A lot of people think that, oh, Marathon is doing great.
Mhm.
Marathon is doing something similar, but because of that risk, I think MicroStrategy is the better play here.
I agree. Yeah, and MicroStrategy, if you look at, I've been talking about these convertible bonds, and those, that is a form of debt. But if you actually look at their debt to asset, and like their liabilities to assets, basically, it's pretty low. Like, they actually are under levered compared to what they have traditionally been. But they are a levered play to Bitcoin. So, and you're right, there is additional risk. You're buying an equity instead of Bitcoin, which is deemed as like basically a commodity. It's just a different type of asset, and you should know that if you're going to be buying, in getting into them. But I think, as far as Bitcoin derivatives go, MicroStrategy is the clear winner. They've clearly taken out. They're clearly in the lead in a lot of different ways. There's a lot of copycats. They've inspired, Semler Scientific, Cooler, Metaplanet. These have done great as well. But to me, MicroStrategy, they got the biggest stack. They're relentless with their strategy, and yeah, I just see it playing out well. But and the risks I see being pretty minimal because of the way they structure their debt. They're very smart about the way they structure their debt. They're staggered out over years, and so they can pay if those conversion, like say MicroStrategy or say Bitcoin has some crazy thing happen to it where it collapses to a really low price. Those convertible debt instruments wouldn't be up for conversion anymore. They would have to pay back the principal. So MicroStrategy would have to raise that money. I think they would be able to raise that money either through traditional debt or through equity offerings, or I still don't think they would ever have to sell their Bitcoin. Like that's what a lot of people get wrong with MicroStrategy at first glimpse. They say, oh, this is a leverage play of Bitcoin. They've taken on debt. They're going to have to sell their Bitcoin. If Bitcoin goes down to a certain price, there'll be a liquidation price. There's actually the debt is completely unsecured. It's never secured by the Bitcoin itself, and that's something people should. I mean, people should look into this, in my opinion, because of how interesting it is. But when you do look into it more, you think, okay, well, this feels pretty solid as far as a growth company goes.
Yeah, even then, I mean, I would say at most probably allocate maybe 15% to MicroStrategy at most. You still want Bitcoin to be your base layer of financial freedom. I think it's a great way to diversify. Let's say, for example, if you lose your Bitcoin, if you go on a if you go on a boating trip and you lose your cold wallet, then you can rely on this Bitcoin to pay for your expenses and all that. So
Yeah.
I think it's a great way to fall back on something. I would say compared to even the ETFs, I'd rather hold MicroStrategy because I believe in where Bitcoin is going, and
Hmm.
I think MicroStrategy is not over leveraged. I don't think that they're going to get liquidated and all that stuff. I think it definitely has uh it definitely has an impact on how people think of investing in the company. I wanted to ask you something else about the cycles.
Hmm.
So right now we are, I don't know, probably in the middle of the in the of the bull market, maybe a little bit further, maybe a little bit earlier. I don't know. But what do you think is going to happen in the coming bear market? There's going to be a bear market. What do you think is going to happen?
I have some theories of why there'll be a bear market, and I
Oh
think,
yeah, that'd be great.
yeah, I think that what we have seen in the past, the last bear market, um, so there's two big things, right? Global liquidity is tied to Bitcoin's price a lot. So there's a contraction in global liquidity. So through quantitative tightening and through all sorts of different practices, there'll be less money out there, and that money gets sucked out of risk assets, and Bitcoin is considered a risk asset. Or so it, we saw that downturn. When was it? I guess 2021, 2022. Bitcoin started going down, and a lot of that was global liquidity, rising interest rates in the states and around the world, and crypto shenanigans blowing up. I think this will be the catalyst for the future bear market that we have is crypto shenanigans. Last time it was BlockFi, Celsius, Three Arrows, FTX. I think next time it'll be something that we probably won't see coming. I don't think it's Tether. I don't think it's Binance. So there's a lot of FUD around those two things. I mean, maybe, who knows? I don't have any insight, like direct insight in that. But there's a lot of crypto shenanigans popping up. World Liberty Financial Coin, buying a bunch of ETH, creating DeFi, like this kind of stuff. It can end pretty poorly. And so I think last time the crypto market kind of imploding. Yeah, Terra Luna was another one, stablecoin, algorithmic stablecoin blowing up. These kind of things started. These things happened in these things. It was sort of like a self-fulfilling prophecy where the Bitcoin or the crypto price started going down, and that's why FTX was seen as insolvent, because they were, if Bitcoin had just kept going up, if crypto had kept going up, they would be able to keep the charade going. They would be able to say, "Oh, we still have your funds. Don't worry about it." But it's because everything started going down. There was all these people starting to sell. CZ says, "Oh, I'm going to sell these tokens." All this kind of stuff, right? It was because we were starting a bear market that it tripped this thing of FTX blowing up, which continued the bear market. So it's kind of like a cascading effect that happens. So it'll probably start with just a slight downturn, global liquidity, maybe interest rates going up, a few different like kind of global macro things. And then this will lead to some crypto shenanigans blowing up. Now, I am a believer of a reduced cycle, or sort of like a minimized bear market, if certain things play out. And we've seen a couple things play out, um, that are big. The president of the United States has talked at the conference, the Bitcoin conference last year. He made some promises. He talked about creating a strategic stockpile of Bitcoin from and not selling the Bitcoin that the U.S. already has. And he also promised to free Ross Ulbricht day one. Yesterday was the first full day of his presidency. You could argue it was day two, but it was his first full day, and he fulfilled that first promise. And so that is a good sign that he will fulfill other promises. And I think if things like that happen, that's a huge, like, game theory starts playing out. And game theory is basically, if you have an opponent and they make a strategic move in a certain way, you have to respond to it. And oftentimes the response is to match their move in whatever way possible. So if they attack you, you attack back, right? If they create a strategic stockpile reserve, then you create a strategic stockpile Bitcoin reserve. So I think if that happens, then we'll see game theory play out. We'll see FOMO from nation states. And this will create a huge price appreciation, probably what we deem as a blow off top, but it will create a lot of uh, holders. These nation states will probably be slow to sell off their Bitcoin. And so that might mute a downturn in the bear market. I imagine we'll still have a retracement. We'll still have some sort of semblance of a bear market. But I kind of think, and especially if these things play out, that the bear market will be muted.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I think what you're saying is right. The fact that we have a new player that can print money and create it out of nothing and add it to the economy, that just changes everything. Like, if you think about it, real estate prices nominally never go down because we have banks that can keep printing more and more money and giving them to people. At points it cools off, but over the long term they just keep rising and rising and rising. Like, we see houses at $500,000 today. In a few years, those same houses are going to be a million. Then the same
Mhm.
house is going to be 1.5 million, then 2 million. That's because the US dollar's value just keeps dropping and dropping and dropping. So people, I think most people just have this belief that the US dollar's value doesn't drop, but in reality it does. And because of that, because we've expected that the previous cycles have worked the way that they have, where we see those 70-80% drawdowns, people are expecting that again.
Yeah.
But they don't realize that because the dollar's value is decreasing and because now we have a player who can just keep adding more and more dollars to the economy, it changes the whole game.
Yeah.
Right? In the past, let's say with FTX, when FTX collapsed, if FTX was a central bank, or if they had a central bank and they could create more Bitcoin and they could lend it to people, or they could create it out of nothing and then they could give it to people who wanted to take their Bitcoin out of FTX, it would change things completely, right? Because FTX wouldn't collapse that way. So what they would have done, it was they would have just bailed themselves out. But today, what's happening is banks are going to be able to do that. So let's say, for example, if the US government borrows a ton of money and they buy Bitcoin with it, there's no way to liquidate them. Who's going to liquidate them?
Yeah.
Who's going to force them to sell? Nobody. There's nobody that can force them to sell because they have the weapons, they have the army, they have the military, they have all of that. So nobody's going to be able to force them to sell. They'll just print more money and fulfill their obligations, right? They'll just borrow more money, pay back their debts. So nobody can stop them from continuously printing money. And I think this is where the concept, I thought of this concept where Bitcoin runs out at every single price. No
Yep.
matter what happens, every single price Bitcoin will run out because the sellers are going to be exhausted. There's going to be no more sellers left, and there's only going to be buyers. So what those buyers are going to do is they're going to bid the price up and up and up. And we have, let's say, nation states like the US can print money. That's the thing that people don't get. The fact that the US can print money and add it to the economy means that the price of Bitcoin is going to keep rising and rising literally forever. because they can just keep adding more and more money to the economy. And it just changes everything. It changes everything about the market. I think that I agree with you. I think the bear market is going to be muted. I think we're going to probably see maybe a 40-50% drop instead of a 70-65. Maybe we'll see a 60% drop. I'd be so happy with that though. What do you think is going to be the what do you think is going to be the peak this cycle?
Oh, like a price prediction of the high?
Yeah.
Or oh,
And we'll hold you to this. So if you're wrong,
okay,
we're gonna
okay, okay,
we'll
yeah.
come after you. I'm just kidding.
Yeah. I I am super not like I don't really do like models and math and stuff. It's not my expertise, although I'm dabbling in it, but so price predictions are tough. I think like kind of base case we're going to 250 this year. I think we're going to see the higher end of 600 if we see nation state adoption.
Wow,
Yeah,
600K.
yeah,
That's
600
huge.
USK. That's my opinion. I do want to touch a couple things that you mentioned there though as well. Go back to the expectation. Like you mentioned how like we've seen these cycles for so long. There's so many people that can just like look at the historical data and they can say, oh, Bitcoin trades in a 4-year cycle. I'm going to sell at, these certain dates or these certain top signals. And it sort of becomes a self fulfilling prophecy as well because people expect there to be a bear market. And then there is because people are selling. And that's what creates it because market cap and price is all just determined by buyers and sellers on the margin of whatever price is available. And you mentioned there, Bitcoin is going to run out at every certain price, and sellers will be exhausted. And I think that's true because we've never seen an asset like Bitcoin that has fixed issuance. That's the key thing. When the price rapidly appreciates on oil, it incentivizes oil companies and gas companies to drill. It incentivizes refineries to restart when they might not have. It incentivizes hiring. When Bitcoin's price goes up, it incentivizes Bitcoin miners to put more hash rate on, but it doesn't create more Bitcoin. The same amount of Bitcoin is issued. And a lot of times, miners are the sellers. Some are starting to hold, but a lot of them still are sellers. And we've had the halving last year. It's now 3.125 Bitcoin every 10 minutes or 450 a day. And it doesn't increase when there's more people wanting to mine Bitcoin. So that supply cannot be increased. Another argument for the down or for the muted bear cycle is we now have financial instruments that are uh, spot Bitcoin holdings in ETFs. So they replicate the price, right? The nominal fiat price of Bitcoin. And it's pretty easy to create a hedged position when you expect a downturn. You could simply buy puts of an ETF. You could still hold all of your spot Bitcoin. You could raise some additional fiat and you could buy puts for the amount that kind of, you could offset the amount of spot that you hold if you expect there to be a downturn. And then if there is a downturn, you sell those puts and it compensates you for basically the downturn in the nominal price of your Bitcoin holdings. And that doesn't require you to actually sell any Bitcoin. So it doesn't increase the selling pressure. So that could mute the bear cycle as well, in my opinion. What do you think about that?
I agree with you. I think
Yeah.
you're right, but I also think let's look at the other side of the equation. With Wall Street just accumulating as much Bitcoin as they can, while I think what you're saying is right, they could also screw up so badly that they have to sell, let's say, 500,000 Bitcoin or a million Bitcoin at some point because they have so much of it. They took so much of it from retail,
Right.
and at that point, who's going to be buying, right? Like, there's definitely going to be companies that are buying. There's going to be people that are buying, but I feel like that's just going to make it so that if they have to just sell 100,000 Bitcoin in a day, that's probably going to bring the market down hard.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, we have to understand that the Bitcoin ETFs are the holders, but they're holding it for institutions and people that are buying it. So, I guess
Yeah.
to kind of like go a little deeper in that, if like some institutions that held a lot of Bitcoin, if they sort of had some sort of problem happen, then yeah, they could become big net sellers of the Bitcoin ETF, which would in kind create selling of spot from the Bitcoin, from the custodians of the ETF. That's definitely possible, but it would have to be some sort of like, institutional collapse of like hedge funds or banks or whoever, or pensions or something like that, right? Which I think is pretty unlikely, that they would have to
Mhm.
become huge net sellers. But yeah, I mean, it's always a possibility. I mean, that we do have new players in the field of Bitcoin. Like, everybody's always hesitant to say this time is different, but we do have different types of buyers of Bitcoin this cycle. So maybe things will be different in some way,
Yeah.
that are
It,
unpredictable.
I think it could go honestly, it could go either way. I feel like the only thing that you can do is sit back, relax, have fun.
Yeah,
That's it, right? Over time, if you've accumulated, let's say you've accumulated point 0.1 Bitcoin. I would say in 10 years, you're probably going to have at least $100,000. In 20 years, you'll probably have at least $1 million. I'd say, right? I think $20 million in 20 years or sorry, $10 million in 20 years for one Bitcoin. I think that's reasonable, right?
for
And
point
if
one.
you just keep oh yeah, point one.
Yeah.
Point one would be a million. So a
Oh,
one Bitcoin would be 10 million in 20
I,
years. I think
I
that's
gotcha.
I think that's pretty reason. Actually, I think that's conservative because even Fidelity was saying $1 billion by 2038, which to me it just sounds insane, but
Yeah.
it actually does make sense when you really think about the fact that price is determined at the margin and this is an inelastic supply asset. Nobody can change it. Like you said,
Yeah.
because of the difficulty adjustment, even if the price goes to $20 billion a coin, miners can't increase the supply. The only thing that can happen is they can sell some of their Bitcoin into the market. But then, I mean, if you look at it from that perspective, miners have to sell less and less in order to fulfill their needs, right? If they need to pay for electricity, the price of Bitcoin is going to rise so much that they're going to have to sell less and less Bitcoin in order to pay for their electricity needs, right? And
Yeah.
that just like it, when you look at it from that perspective, it blows my mind because there's going to be a point when there's no Bitcoin left and people can't wrap their heads around that.
Yeah.
They can't imagine it because it's never happened before.
Yeah. It's almost like it's programmed for the number to go up. It's the only
Yeah,
option, right? The number has to go
exactly.
up to try to find new sellers. It's the only option available at a certain point,
Yeah.
if the demand is there. And
Yeah.
yeah, it will be.
Yeah.
It's that's why I started just trading everything else I had into Bitcoin, because it feels so inevitable. And you don't want to get caught offside by that, but like, it just everything just seems to be lining up in that way. We just see so much evidence of that being the direction that the world is heading. um, and it fills such a need that we have no way to save money well. I don't want to own real estate. I don't want to manage it. I don't want to think about all of the counterparty risks of investing in companies. I just want sound money to save in, and
Yeah.
that's what Bitcoin is giving me. And I th- I think it's going to be the most beneficial for the people on like the lower end of the financial system, right? Like, it's the most beneficial to people that um, live in the financial systems where they don't have access to good capital markets, like in North America and Europe, or they have, their government fiat money is inflating away at an even higher rate. It benefits these people the most, and those are the people that need to be benefited by a financial system the most. So I don't know. It's a beautiful system once you start looking into it. I don't know. Bitcoin was like yeah, Bitcoin was like a game changer for the way I think about the world. And like, it honestly has changed who I am as an individual once I started learning about
Yeah.
Bitcoin, I feel like.
Yeah, I completely agree. I have one question for you that I ask to all my guests. I like to ask this question because it shows me where they think that the world is going. What do you think is the most important downstream effect of Bitcoin? Let's say 10, 20, 30 years from now. What do you think is going to be the biggest change that Bitcoin makes in the world?
I think Bitcoin has the potential to stop war. I think it has the ability to defund government spending, because if people just start accepting that it is base layer money, they no longer will accept a money that has no cost of production, which is fiat. and is only able to the governments around the world, nations around the world, are only able to create destruction in other places because of the allowance uh, of the people accepting fiat money. If war has to get funded, right? Um, Back in the day on the gold standard, it got funded by war bonds. You know, the government would actually sell debt instruments to the people to fund war. The other way it can get funded is by raising taxes. Both those things, well, taxes are incredibly unpopular to raise. War bonds have a certain limit. There's only a certain amount of people willing to support a war effort. And the third way that we have now that we're not on the gold standard is by inflating away the currency, by debasing savers of that currency. And um, if we get rid of that option, if the nations around the world do not have the option to inflate currency away because no one will accept their money, then they have to raise taxes or they have to raise debt to fund military operations, and these military operations will be a small scale compared to what they are now, and they'll happen a lot less often. And I think that this is, I think crazy enough, Bitcoin has a possibility of creating some sort of semblance of world peace amongst nations, which I think is a huge downstream effect. I also think, sorry to expand this into a different direction, but I also think that Bitcoin mining will create a lot of energy abundance because it can tap into stranded energy and otherwise energy that isn't profitable, and they can be a first buyer and a last buyer of that electricity for the Bitcoin network. And this can create energy abundance in locations for villages and for people that don't have electricity. So it can actually, it'll increase the number and the amount of renewable energy being created because it incentivizes these energy producers to grow their energy production because they have a buyer of that electricity. So I think there's a ton of knock-on effects into the future that we will see. We will see that energy one definitely. Excuse me, sorry. I just need a sip of water here. The war one is, a little more hopeful, I think, than maybe full reality. But I hope to see it. I hope to see it become reality.
I think the energy one, I like the war one. I think that's important, but I feel like there's always going to be crazy people out there who have so much money and they're willing to fund whatever effort they have to change the world in the way that they want it to be changed. I think you're right. That is hopeful. I do want that to happen. I really do. Um, but I think the other one, the energy one, that's actually really important because I've been looking more into it. I've been having more conversations with people who really understand the energy side of things. And I had some conversations where people were explaining how, let's say in countries where there is a lower amount of energy being used, less energy is being used. If there's no energy being used, it means that there's less of an incentive to build the grid.
Right.
So if they can bring Bitcoin miners to all these other countries, and they can build grids. Basically, those Bitcoin miners are giving those grids constant demand. So
Yeah.
the people building the grids, the people who own those grids and maintain the grids, they can have a ongoing source of revenue, and they don't even have to worry about oh, what if wants to use this energy, because Bitcoin miners are always going to want to use that energy. So what it does is it gives them that constant cash flow, and they can create bigger and better grids, and they
Mhm.
can increase the amount of energy being used by the people in their cities, in their countries. And I know this is so hard for people to understand because they just think, oh, Bitcoin just uses too much energy. That's the only thing that they that they see here. But
Mhm.
once you see that Bitcoin actually makes energy more abundant, you realize that Bitcoin using energy is a good thing. It's like starting a business, right? You have to have the flywheel start in the beginning. You have to, let's say, for example, for our YouTube channels,
Mhm.
you post your YouTube videos, the first few videos get no views, then the next ones get, let's say, 10, 20, 30 views. Then the next ones get 100 views, 1,000 views. Then the next ones get 10,000 views. Then the next ones get 100,000 views. And it keeps growing, but you had to start somewhere. And that's
Mhm.
where Bitcoin is. Bitcoin is at that starting phase where right now it's using more energy than it's creating.
Yeah.
It's helping people to preserve their energy, but it's not help. It's the way that I see it. It's not really creating energy at this point, but over time, it's going to keep working and working and keep creating better things. Even with mining hardware, for example, there's so much technology that goes into that
Hmm.
to reduce the cost of mining for miners. So, what are they going to do? They're going to find better ways to mine. They're going to find better hardware, and that innovation is going to leak into other parts of our lives, right? So let's say you have a computer, you have a laptop, and it uses a certain amount of energy. Maybe these miners can create some kind of innovation. Maybe the hardware can create some kind of innovation that can be applied to laptops, applied to desktops all over the world, and it decreases the amount of energy overall. And the amount of energy that you save is less than the amount of energy that Bitcoin's using right now, right? It's all just a domino effect, and it just keeps
Hmm.
going and going. I feel like you start going down the rabbit hole and it never ends. Like you never get to the bottom because you're always learning more. I thought that I had known so much about Bitcoin before the energy conversations that I had, but then after I'm just thinking, wow, there's more here for me to learn. There's always more to learn. And
Hmm.
it just keeps going and going.
It's just doing that because of its natural incentive. It's not saying Bitcoin mining isn't this thing of like, oh, let's try to use stranded energy. Let's try to build the grid up for remote locations that where energy costs a lot. Let's try to lower the price of
Yeah.
energy. It's not trying to do any of that. It's just trying to use energy to hash this algorithm, like, and it's just this amazing incentive that naturally lines up. Like, I think that's what's so genius about Bitcoin is it's programmed money. Somebody like designed it. It's totally designed to be perfect money, and all of the incentives around that have been that work for Bitcoin, everything is actually like the way that I envision a good peaceful world to exist. It's a, but it's all just naturally built into it.
Yeah.
it's not because of people's goodwill or anything that any of
Yeah.
this is happening.
It's the incentives, right?
Yeah.
Everybody's incentivized to create more value, and that's just where the world is going. Forrest, I really appreciate your time here. I wanted to ask you, do you have anything else that you wanted to discuss? Anything you want to mention? I want you to also talk about your YouTube at some point. Just tell people where they can find you. Uh, Go ahead. Your slot for whatever you want to say.
Sure. Yeah, I think we covered a lot there. There's a lot to cover in Bitcoin. I mean, you mentioned there that you thought you knew a lot about the energy side and that you're diving more into that. Nobody out there knows everything about Bitcoin. There's going to be blind spots, and that is what's so fun about this space to me is that I get to dive into a new blind spot that I have. I get to learn a little deeper about something. I get to have a misconception that I had around it, change and flip as I learn more. And I just encourage others to look deeper into Bitcoin, however they see fit. Rajat's channel here is a great way to get started and go deeper, right? I think you have a lot of content out there. Yeah, I also produce Bitcoin related content on my channel. It's called Bitcoin Not Crypto. And yeah, it's on YouTube. And I'm on Noster and Twitter at Forest Total. And yeah, I just appreciate your time. Thanks for having me on. And actually, if you guys do check out my channel, I'll have Rajat on soon as well, and kind of get into his story and some more of his thinking around Bitcoin as well.
Amazing. Yeah. If you do watch this, I'm sure you found some value in this conversation. Make sure you go subscribe to Forrest here. Uh, Great. Go to his Twitter, go to his YouTube. Both of them are extremely valuable. Forrest, I really appreciate your time, man. Thank you so much for joining.
Thanks, Rajat. I appreciate it as well.